All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NCPERS Center for Online Learning. Today, we have two exciting research series publications that we'd like to share with you. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some housekeeping matters before we get into the meat of the presentation. First is, in terms of questions, please submit any questions you may have regarding this webinar by using the GoToMeetings dashboard and initiating a chat with our administrator. We will be holding all the questions until end of the formal presentation given by Dr. Michael Kahn. And at the end of the presentation, we will then go over questions that we have received. In terms of the research series, NCPERS recently published two publications. First, in February, titled "How Did the Shift from Defined Benefit Pensions to Defined Contribution Plans in the Private Sector Impact Retirement Savings?" This research series was spurred by a recent document that was published late last year by the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, which many that covered it in the media alleged that there was really no impact on retirement security from the shift from defined benefit to defined contribution. The research series that we've published in February takes a closer look at it, and I think finds some disturbing trends and has some answers, well-put answers in regard to the Boston College research. The second document is something that we just published this month, and it's entitled "Are States and Local Pension Funds Taking More Risk Now Than Before?" There have been a number of allegations over the years that public pension plans are trying to gin up returns by taking excessive amount of risk in terms of their investment profile. This research series takes a systematic look at of public plans over 5 decades to show, in fact, whether there is such a trend of public plans taking more risk than in the past. Leading us in the discussion of both of these documents is the author, Dr. Michael Kahn, who is the research director for NCPERS. Dr. Kahn brings with him more than 30 years of research experience in public pensions and state and local tax and economic policies. He retired from the National Education Association a couple years back, and once retired, established the Institute on Public Pension Solutions, which has the purpose of preserving and enhancing public pensions. In 2014, with the support of NCPERS, Dr. Kahn developed a joint NCPERS IPPS Public Pension Funding Forum, which featured Dr. Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel laureate at Columbia University. Michael serves as a trustee of EBRI and was a member of the Public Employee Committee of IFEBP. He has graduate and postgraduate training on multiple subjects, including economics, geography, and sociology, and holds degrees from the universities of Hawaii, North Carolina, and Catholic University of America. So without further ado, let me turn the program over to Dr. Michael Kahn.
Thank you, Hank. Indeed, it's a pleasure and honor to share with you our two new research series, and I want to thank everyone who is participating in our webinar. Thank you. As Hank mentioned, there's continuous barrage of attacks on defined benefit plans, especially in the public sector. For example, some argue that shift to defined contribution plan has not impacted retirement savings. Others argue that public plans are taking too much risk and need help from Gamblers Anonymous. In fact, this was a headline in a Wall Street Journal. So behind all these attacks, I was just thinking back on my training and looking at why all these attacks. And in my view, behind these attacks are Milton Friedman's ideas, despite their rejection by overwhelming majority of economists. I think only about 10% of economists still believe this supply-side economics. So Milton Friedman argued that there are three things that really are good for the economy. One is privatization. The second one is deregulation. And the third one is tax cuts. So these three ideas continue to be followed till now, I should say. But the fact is, as George Akerlof and Robert Shiller, both of them Nobel Prize winners actually 2 years ago, they have recently published a book on this subject, and they argue that this approach actually results in economic bubbles. It results in economic manipulation and deception, and it results in concentration of wealth and income at the top. Each time the bubble bursts, 99% of us suffer, and a little bit higher share of wealth and income ends up in the hands of top 1%. And you probably hear a lot of this from Bernie Sanders, but this is the kind of data that, looking as researchers, we just look at the data and that's what it shows. Yet people like Arnold Foundation, American Enterprise Institute, and a lot of others keep pushing pension policy into the sort of jaws of economic manipulation in the world, I should say, of economic manipulation and deception. So the purpose of our NCPERS research series is to examine some of these ideological attacks, not really based on any empirical data, and shed some light on what actually the data shows, without making any assumption. So these are very simple analysis I have tried to do and look at the question that were raised in these two series. So with respect to the first series, we look at the shift to defined contribution plans in the private sector. And we did this because of the availability of data, and that's where the most of the shift has taken place over the last 30, 40 years. And as Hank mentioned, the impetus really came from a study done by Center for Retirement Research at Boston College. And the study concluded, they made a lot of assumptions in their analysis. And the conclusion was that retirement savings hasn't really been affected by shift to DC plans. I believe everybody knows when I say DCDB, I mean defined contribution and defined benefit plans. So this sort of sounded counterintuitive to us, so we started looking at the data. Fortunately, Department of Labor has compiled and published data on number of participants and assets in both defined benefit and defined contribution plans in the private sector from 1975 to 2012. So that's like 37 years of data that we thought we could actually look at and to answer this question. We simply calculated per participant savings in each type of plan. Although we know defined benefit plans are not allocated to any individual, but you could still, if you know the number of participants each year and the assets in the plan, you could see what's the for comparative purposes between the two, DC and DB, what was the accumulation of assets per person, per participant, I should say. So let's look at the the slide here, which shows the red line actually shows assets, the bottom line, the assets per person, per participant in the defined contribution plans from 1975 to 2012. And the top line, the blue line, shows assets per participant in defined benefit plans. And you can see that they were pretty close in 1975, and you could see the two lines sort of separating. And at the end of 2012, the assets per participant in DB plans were twice as much as in DC plans. So the top line, the blue line, is almost, it's like $107,000. And the red line, where it ends in 2012, is about $47,000. So that's really more than twice per participant in a defined benefit plan. You get a bigger bang for the buck in this situation. Next, we made a very simple assumption. Suppose everybody was in DB plan. What will be the savings, the total savings? So this is the next slide, which shows the bottom line is the blue line, which shows the actual defined benefit plus defined contribution. This is the total assets, not per person, per participant. So that's about $6.9 trillion. Sorry, there's a T missing there. Somehow got cut off. So $6.9 trillion in 2012 for all participants, DB plus DC, in the private sector. So we said, so suppose there was no shift to defined contribution plans in these 37 years. So what will be the total assets? So that turns out to be twice as much, about $13.9 trillion. You know, we hear about the retirement savings deficit, about 10 trillion in the United States, and you can see that 7 trillion of that, 70% of that shortfall is because of the shift to DC plans over the last 37 years. So I want to move now to the second series. This sort of concludes our question about did really change to DC made no difference. That was the conclusion from a Boston College study. We find that it made a big difference. This shift has really cut the retirement saving in half over 37 years. So the next series we want to talk about, research series we want to talk about, is focused on the risk-taking. And as I mentioned before, the impetus for this series was a Wall Street Journal article in which a research colleague, who is actually a friend, who wrote an article saying public pensions need gamblers anonymous, that they are taking too much risk. So we thought, let's really look into this issue using empirical data. Fortunately, U.S. Bureau of Census provides data on state and local pension plans, and it goes as far back as 1967. So that's a gold mine of data to look at historical trends. As researchers, I think the value added we can bring is not just take one snapshot at one time, but look at the time trend, the historical trend, and then you could actually get a better picture. So we extracted basically two variables from this data set, total assets and the investment returns, and which allowed us to calculate the returns for each year, starting with 1967 all the way to 2013. That was the latest year I had. We calculated the risk in terms of standard deviation, that how much it fluctuated around the mean within each decade and within maybe each year that we took for 50 states. So the first slide here, is a chart showing results for single years, actually 1967, 1977. In this historical data, 2007 was the latest year, and then they have data on the web, which I used next in terms of decades. But this one basically shows the first column is the average return for that year for all 50 states, state and local pension plans. Basically just the investment income over total assets. So that's sort of the percent that is the return. So the level of risk is the standard deviation of that during that year for all 50 states. And then the level of risk is actually taking the ratio of the two, 0.44 divided by 3.89 in terms of 1967, and turns out to be 0.11. So that's risk per unit of return. So that's what we are looking at, and you can see that actually now in 2007, the 50 state and local pension funds were taking lower risk per unit of return than they were in the last 30 years. Only in 1967 the risk level was lower. Perhaps those times most of the portfolios consisted of pretty much fixed income bonds and things like that. So this was one way to look at it. Then we looked at it another way. Let's take, I'm sorry, going in the wrong direction. So then we look at the decades of 60s, 70s. So here we are looking at all of the states within each decade. And here you can also find the same pattern. Actually, at least the last 30 years, the level of risk per unit of return hasn't changed much. 0.15, the last column, the fourth column, you can see it's been about 0.15, 0.16, around that. So there hasn't been really increasing level of risk. We know that portfolios have changed over time. So what it tells me basically is that, you know, kudos to trustees and administrators of pension funds, despite the fact that there are the portfolio has changed, there are new asset classes, all that, but the risk per unit of return has been almost the same for 30 years. So I think I want to conclude my presentation at this point, and I would certainly, I'll turn it back to Hank for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was very good. So yes, we're getting a couple of questions, but before I go to the questions that have been asked, I do want to make a note on something that was part of your slide, which is on slide number 3, which showed, as you demonstrated, that if everybody in the private sector were still in defined benefit plans as opposed to being systematically shifted to defined contribution, that the overall savings rate would be nearly $14 trillion. And I think according to the National Institute on Retirement Security, NCPERS, they estimate that there is a retirement savings gap of $14.5 trillion. So, you know, again, I think what your research demonstrates is that, in fact, retirement security has been vastly undermined by conversion from a defined benefit to defined contribution solely, and that if we did not make that shift, then we wouldn't have a retirement security crisis that we currently do face. So I thought that the parallel between what we could have been saving versus what the current deficit is, I thought that symmetry was just shocking.
Yeah, it was a miss. Sometimes I feel like maybe this retirement savings crisis is self-inflicted. Maybe not consciously, but unconsciously. Maybe part of it is that, you know, privatize. I think, you know, privatizing pension means, you know, you are on your own. So that trend has been very harmful. And I know some friends who just can't retire. I mean, they are my age and just unfortunately, we may have to work until we die. It's so unfortunate.
So a couple of questions. One is in regard to your analysis of risk, you excluded the recession period of 07, 08. Why was that?
That's sort of usually a standard practice when there are extreme values it just throws off everything. I mean, but the recession 2007, 2008, I mean, 1/3, in some cases, 1/2 of the assets were wiped out. I mean, that just makes the analysis, and that was, I think that recession was a result of this, in my view, the policies that we just mentioned, the 3 policies, you know, privatize, deregulate, no rules, and cut. So the ultimate result was, you know, the bubble bursting, and I think then you blame the pension funds where, you know, you're taking too much risk. So to look at 40 years, I think the conclusion to be drawn is that it's pretty smooth. They are not really taking high risk, except for this one big drop, which I again feel like self-inflicted. So I excluded that. If we include it, will be higher, just because of that. But so it throws off the analysis a bit. And in statistics, generally, you want to exclude extreme values. That throws off all of your analysis.
So the bottom line is that's well within the norms of you know, sound statistical practice. It's not that you're gaming the books or gaming the system or cooking the books.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you did mention, you know, the Friedman's idea, the privatization, deregulation, and tax cuts. You know, can you expand on that a little bit? I mean, has it been, you know, completely debunked at this point, or are there still, you know, acolytes of, you know, the supply side?
Yeah, I think, I mean, almost like 90% of the economists are on the other side. but there are still people, you know, the Chicago School and all those, that's where it was built. So as a little bit of history, which is very interesting, that is shown in, actually written in a book by Naomi Klein. It's called The Sharp Doctrine. I don't know if anybody has read that, but it's worth reading, and I think Milton Friedman was, I mean, he was a Nobel Prize winner and very well-known economist, but he was also an advisor to President Reagan. So a little bit background on that. So various business leaders, especially Walter Wriston, who was chairman of Citibank, approached Friedman, and I guess the idea, they were saying, well, you know, we only, corporate profits are only like 10%, and is there something you as a economist could tell us that our profits go up? So they came up with this idea of really privatization, deregulation, and tax cut formula. In fact, I have a slide here I want to put up. You can see here President Reagan in the middle, and Milton Friedman on his right, and Walter Wriston, he was chair of the Citibank at that time, on his left. So they came up with this idea, well, this may be the way to go, and you may recall President Reagan, the first thing he did was cut taxes from 70% was the top income tax to 35%. So that was 50% cut right away during his term. And they actually, they trained about maybe hundreds of economists who were to promote this three-pronged approach to the economy: privatize, deregulate, and cut taxes. And those people are still actually and they were actually placed on very important positions to promote this idea, especially at the International Monetary Fund and various other places. So this could be promoted. So this still continues, as you know, you probably hear, if you pay attention to some people speaking about economy, they would say, well, we got to deal, the rules are too many, and the regulations are too many. The biggest thing that happened during President Reagan's administration was cracking the wall between the commercial and financial banks. And that was totally demolished later on. So this still continues, and I think pensions, we forgot about today why we have private sector and why we have public sector. And the role of public sector is to provide services to ensure public good for the society, like education, public safety, roads, infrastructure. And the role of private sector is to make profit. I mean, if I'm head of a corporation and say my goal is not to make money, my shareholders are going to fire me right away. So pensions are really public good. They have positive societal outcome, and privatizing pensions or social security, for that matter, is going to be very, very harmful. But it's being pushed from this idea doesn't really go away. It's still the pushing for privatize, deregulate, and cut taxes, and that's the recipe for, from their side, is the economic growth. But as has been proven, it's a recipe for disaster, unfortunately. And we'll have Professor Schiller, those of you who plan to attend our August pension forum, he'll be speaking about this at the forum. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Michael. So that's it for the questions. Before we conclude, I will make a couple of quick announcements. So For those folks on the line and participating in this webinar, if you're from a plan, we'd be curious to see how your plan measures and monitors investment risk. So via offline, if you could send us an email on how you measure or monitor investment risk, that'd be some good information to have for us that can supplement some of the information in the research series on investment risk. And lastly, there will be a short 3-question survey at the conclusion of the webinar. It's just to help us understand the value that we're providing in terms of the webinar and the research series. So if you could take a minute at most to take the short 3-question survey, we'd really, really appreciate it. And again, let me end by thanking Michael for the research series as well as this presentation, and also thank you all for participating in another edition of our Center for Online Learning. Thank you.
Thank you.